White airline staff mocks black woman. Then she stuns them with her U.S. Senator ID. They say true power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes underestimating the quiet figure in the corner can be the biggest mistake you make. That's exactly what happened one seemingly ordinary day at Chicago's O'Hare International Airport when an unsuspecting black woman walked into the terminal, minding her own business. Little did the airline staff know that behind her polite smile and unassuming demeanor were the credentials of a U.S. senator, credentials that had the potential to send shockwaves through their entire operation. Dismissed and mocked for her appearance, she kept her composure. But when the disrespect became too blatant to ignore, she made a move that no one saw coming. Senator Alia Johnson stepped into the bustling Terminal 3 of O'Hare, pulling a modest carry-on suitcase behind her. She was dressed in a practical yet elegant gray pantsuit, with a simple black purse slung over her shoulder. Her short, close-cropped curls framed her face, and the only jewelry she wore was a delicate gold necklace. She preferred to travel light, no entourage, no extravagant displays. It was a habit that kept her grounded, a reminder of her humble upbringing in Detroit, where her parents had instilled in her the values of hard work and quiet resilience. Now serving her second term as a U.S. Senator from Michigan, Alia was well known on the national stage. Yet, outside of the television cameras and the formal trappings of office, she often found that people didn't immediately recognize her. She liked it that way. It gave her the chance to experience the world the way her constituents did, to understand their daily struggles firsthand. Today, she was en route to Washington, D.C., for critical committee hearings on economic reform. The morning had been hectic. She had wrapped up a local town hall, fielded a half-dozen calls from colleagues, and now had just enough time to catch her early afternoon flight. Like any traveler, she expected no special treatment, just basic courtesy. Still, she couldn't ignore the subtle glances from passers-by. Some seemed to recognize her but couldn't quite place her. Others simply thought she looked vaguely familiar. At the American Airlines self-check-in kiosk, Alia entered her reservation details, verifying her seat assignment. A text notification popped up from her chief of staff, Vanessa, reminding her to be ready for back-to-back meetings as soon as she landed. Alia exhaled quietly. The demands of her position were relentless, but she welcomed the challenge. She had no idea, however, that her day was about to take an unexpected turn. Her mind was occupied with the usual inconveniences of modern air travel. Long lines, security checks, potential delays. What she didn't anticipate was the outright disrespect she was about to encounter from airline employees. And she certainly couldn't have predicted just how far their mockery would escalate once professionalism was replaced with open ridicule. But Alia had faced storms before. She carried within her a quiet determination, and something else. Something that would soon leave them speechless. An identification card confirming her status as a United States Senator. Their sneers were about to backfire spectacularly. After checking in, Senator Johnson proceeded to the baggage drop-off area. Even though she preferred to travel light, she had one small suitcase she wanted to check so she could move through the airport more freely. She approached the American Airlines baggage counter, where two uniformed employees stood behind the desk. One, a young man named Jacob, barely concealed his boredom. The other, a woman named Shannon, seemed more interested in her phone than in assisting passengers. Both appeared to be in their mid-20s, their name tags pinned neatly to their standard-issue uniforms. Alia offered a polite smile as she handed over her reservation details. "Good afternoon," she greeted, keeping her tone warm in an attempt to set a positive tone. Jacob barely looked at her. Instead, his eyes flicked to the computer screen as he muttered, "ID, please," without so much as a greeting or eye contact. Alia retrieved her driver's license from her purse and handed it over. She didn't mind a straightforward exchange, but something about their body language felt off. Shannon, who was supposed to be assisting, barely acknowledged her. She remained absorbed in her phone, stifling a laugh at whatever she was reading. Jacob, meanwhile, typed a few details into the system, then suddenly paused, frowning at the screen. "Ah, looks like you booked a first-class ticket," he said, his tone carrying a distinct note of skepticism. "That's correct," Alia replied evenly. She had purchased the ticket herself. The extra space and quiet of first class allowed her to focus on reviewing documents for the upcoming committee hearing. Given how frequently she traveled, the expense was more than justified. Jacob let out a barely audible snort, exchanging a glance with Shannon. Amusement flickered in his expression. Shannon finally looked up, giggled, then returned to her phone, making no effort to hide the smirk on her lips. Alia's brow furrowed slightly. She had encountered disrespect before, particularly in the political arena, where adversaries often underestimated her. But this level of dismissiveness from airline employees was unexpected. "Is there an issue with my ticket?" she asked, her voice composed. Jacob shook his head.
No.
"No problem," he mumbled, though his tone suggested otherwise. He printed out the baggage tag and handed it to her abruptly. "Take your bag to the oversized drop-off area over there," he added, waving vaguely toward a section of the terminal, making it clear he had no intention of assisting further. Behind him, Shannon's quiet laughter lingered in the air. A flicker of irritation sparked in Alia, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had no intention of making a scene, at least not yet. Courtesy was a two-way street, but some people simply refused to meet you halfway. For now, she let it slide. Yet, a quiet voice in the back of her mind warned her. This was only the beginning. Shortly after, Alia maneuvered her carry-on toward the TSA security checkpoint. She had dropped off her checked luggage, carefully verifying that the tag was correct. As she approached the ropes leading to the X-ray scanners, a commotion caught her attention a few lanes over. A passenger was in a heated exchange with TSA officers, their voice rising in frustration. Alia felt a familiar pang of sympathy. Travel could be stressful and misunderstandings happened all the time. Thankfully, the TSA pre-check line moved faster. Still, as she stepped forward, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that what had just happened at the baggage counter wasn't over. And she was right. What happened next would soon become national news. She had pre-check as part of her frequent travel for official duties, though she rarely displayed her senator credentials unless absolutely necessary. She believed that the principle of equal treatment was best upheld by going through standard procedures like everyone else. Besides, she preferred to experience daily life without constantly announcing her status. As Alia placed her laptop and shoes in separate bins, she heard faint snickering behind her. Turning slightly, she caught sight of Shannon and Jacob stepping into the TSA line, now off duty, chatting as they eyed her. It struck her as odd. Why would airline employees be passing through security as if they were passengers? Then she remembered that staff sometimes flew as non-revenue passengers, either to reposition or take advantage of flight benefits. She overheard their hushed exchange. "Shannon, first class. Seriously? Did you see that old carry-on? Looks like she got it at a thrift store." Jacob scoffed. "The nerve of some people. Bet she scammed some upgrade or something." Shannon tittered. "Right? She definitely doesn't look like she belongs up there with the business crowd." Their eyes flicked toward Alia, who pretended not to hear. A tightness formed in her chest. The open mockery stung, not because of what they said about her luggage, but because of how quickly they had dismissed her, making assumptions based on nothing more than her appearance. She kept her composure. As a senator, she was used to criticism, but this felt more personal, more pointed. Taking a deep breath, she reminded herself that not everyone at American Airlines behaved this way. Over the years, she had encountered many professional and courteous airline employees, but these two were crossing a line. She refocused on her priorities. There was urgent work waiting in DC. Petty behavior from two airline staff members wasn't going to derail her. Still, a flicker of irritation lingered. If their behavior escalated, she wouldn't hesitate to remind them, politely but firmly, that every passenger deserved respect. For now, she collected her belongings from the security scanner and moved forward, bracing herself for whatever lay ahead at the gate. After clearing security, Alia glanced at her boarding pass, Gate 12 for American Airlines Flight 1081. With some time before boarding, she decided to grab a coffee from a nearby cafe. The airport buzzed with travelers, some heading to reunite with family, others rushing to business meetings. Every person carried a story, and Alia found airports fascinating. A crossroads where countless lives briefly intersected, each moment filled with unseen possibilities. She settled into a seat in the cafe's small seating area, sipping her latte while reviewing notes for the upcoming committee hearing. She planned to push for stronger economic support for small businesses in low-income neighborhoods, a cause close to her heart. She had grown up watching her parents struggle to keep their modest auto repair shop afloat during Detroit's economic downturn, and she knew firsthand how vital these businesses were to communities. Midway through her notes, a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me, ma'am. Can I ask you something?" Alia looked up to see an American Airlines employee, her uniform neatly pressed, a warm smile on her face. Her name tag read Carol. "Of course," Alia replied, standing to address her. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for any inconvenience you may have experienced earlier," Carol said in a lowered voice. "I don't know exactly what happened, but I noticed Jacob and Shannon giggling and making comments at the check-in counter. It didn't seem right." Alia felt a mix of gratitude and surprise. "Thank you, I appreciate that. I did sense some unprofessional behavior, but I wasn't sure if I was just reading too much into it." Carol shook her head. "No, it wasn't just you. They've had complaints before. I don't have direct authority over them, but I wanted to let you know that if you need anything, I'm stationed near Gate 10. You can come find me." Touched by Carol's concern, Alia smiled warmly. "That's very kind of you. I'm all right for now, but if anything else happens, I'll be sure to reach out." With a sympathetic nod, Carol walked away. Alia sank back into her seat, feeling a wave of relief. At least not everyone at the airline condoned this kind of behavior. She hoped she wouldn't need Carol's assistance, but the subtle warning was clear. Something about Shannon and Jacob's attitude could escalate if left unchecked. Alia wanted to believe the best in people, but experience had taught her that prejudice, whether subtle or overt, could fester quickly. She turned back to her notes, but the sense of calm she'd had earlier was now tinged with unease about what might lie ahead. Arriving at Gate 12, Alia found the waiting area crowded. The overhead screens displayed flights to various destinations, but her flight, 1081 to Washington National Airport, was set to board in 30 minutes. She spotted an empty seat near the window and settled in, continuing to review her talking points. Across the aisle, a young mother struggled to calm her restless toddler, while two businessmen in suits engaged in an animated discussion about market trends. She took in the scene with a small smile. Travel always reminded her that behind every itinerary lay unique stories and struggles. She was used to observing people, her political instincts naturally attuned to the human side of policy work. Then, as if on cue, Shannon and Jacob appeared at the gate podium. Alia's stomach tightened. They were now stationed at the boarding desk, apparently assigned to assist with the process. As they scanned the crowd with bored expressions, Jacob tapped at the computer while Shannon leaned in to whisper something to him. A quiet burst of laughter followed. Alia caught the look on their faces. Condescending, dismissive. It didn't take long for them to spot her. Jacob nudged Shannon, subtly motioning toward Alia. Shannon rolled her eyes before turning back to the computer with a smirk. Alia pretended to be absorbed in her notes, but her pulse quickened. She reminded herself to stay composed and focused. A part of her wanted to confront them and demand respect, but she decided against escalating the situation, at least for now. Minutes later, the gate loudspeaker crackled to life. "Attention, passengers of American Airlines Flight 1081 to Washington National. We will begin pre-boarding shortly for passengers requiring assistance, families with young children, and active military personnel." Jacob's voice was flat, almost robotic, but Shannon smirked in Alia's direction. Alia remained in her seat, waiting for the first-class boarding call. She was well accustomed to standard boarding procedures, yet an uneasy feeling settled in her chest. She suspected they might try something. Suddenly, a light tap on her shoulder. Alia turned to see a fellow passenger gesturing toward the seat next to her, where she had placed her briefcase. "May I sit here?" the passenger asked politely. "Of course," Alia replied, moving her briefcase onto her lap. She tucked her phone, wallet, and boarding pass inside, mentally preparing for any potential trouble. Time was ticking toward boarding. If Shannon and Jacob planned to cause an issue, she would find out soon enough. She was among the first-class passengers set to board next, though they had no idea just how wrong their assumptions were. Alia arrived at Gate 12 to find it bustling with the usual pre-boarding commotion. Families wrangling restless children, business travelers glued to their laptops, and weary tourists leaning against rolling suitcases. The overhead monitors briefly displayed a slight delay, but a staff member quickly corrected the information. Alia knew from experience that minor schedule adjustments were common and rarely a cause for concern. She scanned the area for a seat, but most were occupied. Instead, she opted to stand near a large window, quietly reviewing the documents she needed for her upcoming Senate committee session. Yet, no matter how hard she tried to focus on legislative points, her attention kept drifting toward the two American Airlines employees stationed at the gate podium, Shannon and Jacob, the same two who had been so dismissive at check-in. A knot of apprehension formed in her stomach. From where she stood, she could observe their behavior, something she could only describe as blatantly unprofessional. Shannon scrolled through her phone, periodically rolling her eyes at the growing line of passengers. Jacob lazily answered travelers' questions, barely making eye contact, his demeanor anything but welcoming. When they spoke to each other, they exchanged smug expressions, hushed whispers, and the occasional stifled laugh. Twice, Alia caught them glancing in her direction. She steadied herself, reminding herself that she had long mastered the art of maintaining composure in uncomfortable public settings. In the Senate, she regularly faced heated debates and political opponents far more combative than these two airline employees. Yet, this situation felt different, more personal. She had simply arrived at the airport in her usual professional but understated attire, only to be immediately labeled an outsider by strangers who knew nothing about her. Their assumptions had been formed in an instant, based on nothing but their own biases. The loudspeaker crackled again. Passengers requiring additional time, as well as those traveling with small children, may now board. Parents ushered toddlers toward the jet bridge. Alia exhaled slowly. First-class boarding would be next. This was the moment she had been anticipating with a mix of dread and determination, coming face-to-face with Shannon and Jacob once more. Sure enough, once the families had boarded, Jacob cleared his throat and spoke into the microphone. "We will now begin boarding for our first-class passengers and executive platinum members on American Airlines Flight 1081 to Washington National." Shannon stood beside him, posture stiff, scanning the waiting passengers as if daring someone to step forward. Alia picked up her carry-on and joined the short first-class queue. She was fourth in line, behind an older couple dressed in matching beige windbreakers and a businessman juggling two cell phones. The line was small, exactly what she had expected for a midday flight. As the line inched forward, she caught snippets of conversation from Shannon and Jacob. "Oh, look who's here," Shannon muttered, her voice laced with sarcasm. Jacob let out a quiet chuckle. The elderly couple in front of Alia exchanged a puzzled glance, clearly sensing the tension. They proceeded without issue. Shannon and Jacob scanned their boarding passes without hesitation, nodding them through. Then it was Alia's turn. Shannon took her boarding pass, staring at the screen with exaggerated scrutiny, as though searching for some kind of error. Meanwhile, Jacob leaned in slightly, peering at Alia with a mixture of amusement and doubt. "Miss Johnson, is it?" Shannon asked, arching a brow. "That's correct," Alia replied evenly, offering a small nod. Her tone was calm yet firm. "First-class seat, I see," Shannon continued, eyeing the details on the screen. She let the words linger, an unspoken challenge hanging in the air. "How could you possibly belong here?" "Yes," Alia responded, unfazed. She had booked this seat fairly, just like any other passenger who wanted extra space to work. Jacob made a show of checking the digital manifest on his own terminal. "Huh, that's interesting," he murmured, tapping the screen. He leaned closer to Shannon and whispered, loud enough for Alia to hear, We should be careful about letting people slip into first class who might not actually belong. A sharp heat flared in Alia's chest, but she kept her voice steady. Is there an issue with my reservation? Shannon hesitated, as if momentarily at a loss for words. Then, Shannon forced a patronizing smile. No problem, Miss Johnson, she said, handing back the scanned boarding pass. We just need to verify that you purchased the seat, rather than upgrading with miles you don't have or some other arrangement. A flicker of confusion crossed Alia's mind. Excuse me? I used my frequent flyer account just like everyone else to book. I also paid the difference for first class. It should be in your records. Shannon waved the boarding pass dismissively. I'm sure it's fine, she said, her tone dripping with insincerity. But we see this kind of thing all the time. You'd be surprised how many people try to sneak in an upgrade. Jacob flashed a mocking grin. Gotta watch out for those free riders. He emphasized the words, his tone making Alia's skin crawl. Behind Alia, the businessman with 2 phones cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the exchange. But Shannon and Jacob barely acknowledged him, too engrossed in undermining Alia. The older couple who had just boarded stood a few steps away, pretending not to eavesdrop but clearly intrigued by what was unfolding. Sensing all eyes on her, Alia refused to let herself feel humiliated. Her father's teachings echoed in her mind. Hold your head high. Never let them see you sweat. She straightened her posture. I assure you, there's no free riding here. Shannon shrugged, returning the boarding pass with an almost theatrical gesture. Then by all means enjoy your flight, she drawled, making it sound far from a well-wish. Alia suppressed a sharp retort, gripping her carry-on and stepping forward. She decided that if this behavior continued, she would address it more formally. She had faced mockery and prejudice before, a lifetime's worth, in fact, but she also knew that once the flight was airborne, the crew on board would be her primary concern. If Shannon and Jacob intended to keep provoking her, they would soon find out that this passenger had both the fortitude and authority to stand her ground. As she walked down the jet bridge, her stomach churned with frustration and a subtle undercurrent of dread. She reminded herself of the important work waiting for her in Washington. She needed to keep her focus, but if they kept pushing, she thought she wouldn't hesitate to stand up for herself, no matter the consequences. At the aircraft door, a flight attendant named Tony greeted her warmly. His courteous smile was a small but welcome sign that not everyone shared Shannon and Jacob's contempt. Alia found solace in his kindness. As she settled into seat 2A and stowed her belongings in the overhead bin, her phone buzzed with messages from her staff. She took a moment to compose herself. The sting of Shannon's and Jacob's cruel words still lingered, but she was determined to rise above it. Tony approached her with a kind demeanor. Good afternoon. May I offer you a drink before takeoff? We have water, juice, or champagne. Alia smiled politely, appreciative of his warmth. Just water for now, thank you. He nodded and returned moments later with a chilled bottle of water and a plastic cup. Alia thanked him quietly, feeling grateful to have at least one flight attendant treating her with respect. As passengers continued filing into first class, stowing their bags and settling down, Alia recognized a few from the gate. Business travelers, a couple on vacation, and a mother with an infant. Then, to her surprise, Shannon and Jacob entered the first-class cabin. It wasn't unusual for gate agents to board last-minute tasks or coordinate with the crew, but they seemed intent on something as they made a beeline for Tony. Alia pretended to focus on her phone, but her peripheral vision tracked them. She watched as Shannon whispered something to Tony, who frowned and glanced toward Alia. Jacob stood behind Shannon, arms crossed. Tony raised a hand as if to signal calm, but Shannon continued speaking, her tone growing more insistent. Finally, Tony nodded, apparently placating them, and then walked toward Alia's seat. Miss Johnson, he said softly, though Alia could probably hear him throughout the entire cabin. She looked up, noticing the curious stares of other passengers. Yes. Tony glanced back at Shannon and Jacob, then leaned closer. They're concerned about your boarding pass. They want to verify that you're indeed booked in first class. Alia felt a sharp pang of disbelief. I already showed my boarding pass at the gate. Why is there a question now? Tony hesitated, obviously uncomfortable.
I'm sorry, Mom.
They said there was an error on the manifest and they need to double-check. Could I see your pass again, please? Jaw tight, Alia pulled the pass from her phone's wallet app. Tony scanned it with a handheld device. Moments later, it beeped, confirming the match. Tony looked relieved, turning to Shannon and Jacob. She's fine. 2A is confirmed. No errors. But Shannon's eyes narrowed at Alia, and Jacob shook his head as if unconvinced. The tension in the air was palpable. Alia took a deep breath, deciding once again to stay calm. Yet her patience was wearing thin, and the moment to reveal who she truly was fast approaching. With Tony's reassurance, the rest of the first-class passengers took their seats. Shannon and Jacob lingered in the aisle, an unusual sight since gate agents typically left once boarding closed. Alia noticed the flight crew exchanging confused glances. One attendant, an older woman named Linda, quietly asked Shannon if there was an issue. Shannon waved her off, muttering something about just making sure everything was in order. Alia could feel every muscle in her body tense. She had done absolutely nothing to warrant this scrutiny. Yet their suspicions seemed fixated on her. It was more than just a simple mistake or a bureaucratic mix-up. It felt personal, laced with the microaggressions she recognized all too well. Across the cabin, a few other passengers whispered, casting sidelong glances at Alia. She realized that to an outsider, the scene might appear as though she had committed some offense. She was torn between indignation and the instinct to maintain her composure. In the back of her mind, she considered pulling out her Senate ID, but part of her recoiled at the thought. Why should she have to prove her worth? Shouldn't respect and courtesy be extended to every passenger? The plane's door closed with a decisive thud, and the announcement came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard American Airlines Flight 1081 to Washington National. Flight time is approximately 1 hour and 45 minutes, weather permitting. Shannon and Jacob finally turned to leave, but before they did, Shannon shot one last look at Alia, shaking her head with a smirk. Jacob whispered something and chuckled, leaving Alia with a simmering anger in her gut. As the plane began to taxi away from the gate, Alia gazed out the window at the sprawling airfield, with row after row of planes scattered across the runways, each one carrying passengers with distinct stories and backgrounds. She reflected on how the airline staff's job should be to ensure a smooth experience for all passengers, not to single someone out and mock them. But prejudice had a way of creeping in where it didn't belong. Linda and Tony went through the safety demonstration, and Alia forced herself to pay attention, if only to distract her mind from the adrenaline surging through her veins. She gripped the armrest, inhaling and exhaling slowly. She reminded herself that once she reached DC, she would refocus on the legislative battle at hand. Yet a part of her was determined that if Shannon and Jacob tried anything else, she would not remain silent. Sometimes the best way to confront injustice was to stare it down, and if necessary, show them exactly who they were dealing with. 30 minutes into the flight, the seatbelt sign blinked off, and Tony and Linda began the first-class service, offering drinks and small plates. Alia could usually relax at this point. She'd enjoy a light snack or maybe review a briefing packet. But her nerves were still on edge, replaying Shannon's sneer and Jacob's derisive laughter. Her phone, now permitted in airplane mode, was open to her staff's messages. Vanessa, her chief of staff, had sent a heads-up about new data relevant to the committee hearing. Alia tried to immerse herself in the numbers, but a soft chime over the intercom distracted her. "Ah, Tony, please report to the forward galley," a shaky voice said. It was Linda, sounding anxious. Tony excused himself from serving drinks and walked up the aisle. Sensing tension, Alia discreetly turned her head. Linda looked pale, her eyes darting nervously. Standing next to her, unbelievably, were Shannon and Jacob. How had they even gotten back on board? Had they stayed on the plane? This was highly irregular. Gate agents typically didn't remain on board after the doors closed. Perhaps they had managed to board as non-revenue passengers. Alia couldn't hear every word, but certain phrases reached her ears. "She's definitely not what she claims," Shannon said. "Some messed up credentials," Jacob added. Tony's face contorted in confusion. Linda tried to calm them, shaking her head as though she disagreed. Alia's pulse raced. Enough was enough. She unbuckled her seatbelt, ignoring the watchful eyes of other passengers, and made her way up the aisle toward the flight attendants and the two gate agents. Tony noticed her and looked relieved, while Shannon stiffened. "Is there a problem?" Alia asked, her tone firm but controlled. She refused to be a passive bystander in her own humiliation. Shannon crossed her arms and glared. "We have reason to believe your documentation is fraudulent." She flipped out her phone, showing Tony something on the screen. "There's no record of an Alia Johnson of your background paying for a first-class seat," she emphasized, her words almost sounding like an accusation in itself. Jacob chimed in. "Why don't you come clean about how you got this seat?" Alia felt a surge of anger so intense it almost made her tremble. She had never encountered such blatant disrespect in an airline cabin. Tony tried to intervene. "We already scanned her boarding pass. Everything checks out." Shannon brushed him aside. "I'm sure you can check out anything if you have the right counterfeit or stolen information. Let me see your ID, Miss Johnson. Right now." Alia's heart hammered. She could keep quiet, show them only her driver's license again, or she could end this charade. The lines had been drawn. She held her ground, her jaw set, and made a decision that would change the entire trajectory of that flight. Alia reached into her purse, her fingers grazing past her driver's license and landing on the leather pouch that contained a small but powerful piece of identification. Her United States Senate ID. She had always been careful not to flaunt her position. She had earned her place through decades of public service and a relentless drive for equality. But these two gate agents, Shannon and Jacob, had pushed every boundary of decency. She removed the ID card and held it up for Shannon, Jacob, Tony, and Linda to see. The official seal of the U.S. Senate gleamed under the cabin lights. "You want proof?" she asked calmly, though her voice quivered with contained fury. "I'm Senator Alia Johnson of Michigan. This is my identification." A stunned silence fell over the galley. Shannon's face blanched, her smirk vanishing. Jacob's eyes darted from the ID to Alia's face, disbelief evident in his slackened jaw. Tony seemed equally shocked, though there was an undercurrent of respect. Linda gasped softly, realizing the gravity of the situation. Breaking the silence, Alia continued, "You've harassed me since I checked in. You accused me of lying about my seat, implied I was fraudulent, and singled me out based on your assumptions. Now that you know exactly who I am, would you care to explain yourselves?" Shannon tried to speak but only managed to sputter. Jacob, eyes wide, managed a shaky apology. We had no idea." Alia's anger flared. "No, you didn't, and that's the point. You had no idea, yet you treated me with open disdain. Your personal biases have no place in an airline that claims to uphold professionalism and respect. This behavior is unacceptable toward any passenger, senator or not." Tony stepped forward, carefully examining the ID. The authenticity was unquestionable. His face reddened with embarrassment, but there was also a strong desire to fix the situation. "Senator Johnson," he said gently, "I'm truly sorry this happened on my flight. We value your patronage, and we want all passengers to feel safe and respected. I'll need to inform the captain about this incident immediately." Shannon stood frozen, her cheeks flushed. Jacob swallowed hard, staring at the floor. Linda hovered, unsure how to de-escalate. Alia returned the ID to her purse. "Yes, please inform the captain. And when we land, I expect to speak with a senior manager from American Airlines about this," she said, her tone resolute. The revelation had been made. The next steps were now up to Shannon, Jacob, and the airline's leadership. But Alia was done pretending everything was fine. After the explosive reveal, Tony hurried to the cockpit, presumably to inform the captain of the brewing crisis. Meanwhile, Shannon and Jacob seemed paralyzed, exchanging frantic whispers. Their earlier bravado had vanished, evaporating like morning fog in the face of the truth. Alia stood in the galley, her anger simmering just below the polished surface she maintained. She could almost hear her parents' voices reminding her to stay composed under pressure. Over the years, her political career had taught her that composure often carried more power than raw fury. Still, her hands trembled from the lingering adrenaline. She had never intended to pull rank, but the situation demanded nothing less. Nearby passengers noticed the commotion. Some recognized her name now that it was spoken aloud. A soft murmur rippled through the first rows of economy, where curious eyes peered over seatbacks. Alia realized the scene was rapidly turning into a mini-public spectacle. Finally, Tony returned, motioning for Alia. "Senator Johnson, the captain would like to speak with you in the forward galley." She nodded and followed him, passing Shannon and Jacob, who stood aside. She caught a glimpse of shame on their faces but felt no sympathy at that moment. In the narrow corridor, Captain Rose Hernandez stood waiting, an authoritative figure with a crisp uniform and a calm, collected demeanor. "Senator Johnson," she began quietly, "I've just been briefed on the situation. Let me start by sincerely apologizing on behalf of American Airlines. This is unacceptable. We aim to treat every passenger with dignity, and you, in particular, should never have been subjected to this." Alia raised a hand gently. "Captain, I appreciate your immediate attention, but I want to make it clear that I expect accountability for Shannon and Jacob. They've harassed me repeatedly, not just once. Whether I'm a senator or not is irrelevant. No passenger should have to endure this behavior." Captain Hernandez nodded, her expression sincere. "I agree. I will contact our operations team as soon as we land. We'll have a representative meet you at the gate. I assure you, we take these complaints very seriously." A sudden jolt of turbulence shook the plane, briefly punctuating the conversation. Alia steadied herself against the galley's counter. "Thank you," she managed, regaining her balance. "I'll return to my seat now." As she walked back through the aisle, she felt the weight of gazes upon her. Pity, respect, curiosity, even confusion. The entire cabin buzzed with tension. There was still an hour left before they reached Washington, but Alia had made her stand. Now she had to see it through. When Alia returned to her seat, Tony discreetly pulled her aside. "Senator, do you mind if Shannon and Jacob offer you an apology?" he asked softly. "They insist on speaking with you." She weighed her options. Part of her wanted nothing more to do with them, but she also knew that as a public figure, she often had to navigate delicate situations with grace. "All right," she said with a measured nod. "They can come here, but I'm not in the mood for excuses." Moments later, Shannon and Jacob appeared, looking like scolded children forced to apologize in the principal's office. Shannon opened her mouth first, but no words came out. Jacob cleared his throat. "Senator Johnson, we're really sorry about the misunderstanding. We had some irregularities on the passenger manifest." Shannon jumped in, her eyes darting nervously. "We didn't mean any harm. We just thought someone might be using a fake identity to get a free upgrade. It happens sometimes, you know?" Alia's gaze remained steady. "So you immediately assumed I was committing fraud because—" Shannon's face flushed. "We, didn't recognize you and your seat assignment flagged in our system. That's all." Alia inhaled slowly. She had encountered these half-baked excuses many times, both in politics and in life. "Whether or not you recognized me shouldn't matter. Any passenger deserves the presumption of honesty, especially if they've presented valid credentials at check-in, at the gate, and again on board. You crossed the line from diligence into harassment." Jacob grimaced. "I know we messed up." "Yes," Alia agreed curtly. "You did." Shannon looked on the verge of tears, though Alia couldn't tell if it was genuine remorse or just embarrassment for being caught. "We truly are sorry," Shannon whispered. "We never thought. We didn't know you were." She trailed off, struggling for words. "A senator," Alia finished the sentence for her. a sharp edge in her tone. Does that make me more worthy of respect? Or is it just the shock that you offended someone in a high-profile position? Shannon and Jacob stood mute, unable to respond. Finally, Alia said, "Well, if you are truly sorry, perhaps you'll take a hard look at your assumptions. I accept your apology on the condition that your behavior changes, not just toward me, but toward every passenger who might look different than you expect." They mumbled their gratitude and slinked away. Alia sat down, unclenching the tension in her shoulders. The immediate confrontation was over, but the real reckoning would come once they landed. She had no intention of letting them get away scot-free for their blatant disrespect, senator or not. Accountability was crucial. The rest of the flight was subdued, yet charged with undercurrents of gossip. Alia could sense that nearly everyone in first class had figured out her identity, and word had likely spread to coach. Despite the quiet stir, the flight crew maintained a professional front, offering standard services. Tony and Linda both appeared apologetic whenever they passed Alia's seat. Once the aircraft began its descent, Captain Hernandez's voice crackled over the PA system, instructing everyone to return to their seats and fasten their seatbelts. Alia glanced out the window, catching a glimpse of the familiar sprawl of the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Though she had flown in countless times, each approach held a certain weight. This city was the epicenter of legislative power, the stage upon which she fought for her constituents. The wheels touched down smoothly at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. Alia felt a wave of relief. She was eager to get off the plane, meet with the senior representative from American Airlines, and address the situation properly. She had a full day of committee work ahead, but first, she needed to make sure the airline took her complaint seriously. As the plane taxied to the gate, Alia's phone buzzed with incoming messages. The moment the seatbelt sign went off, she saw a text from Vanessa. "Heard you had a situation on your flight. Are you okay?" Media inquiries are swirling. Alia sighed, realizing just how quickly news spread. Someone must have already tipped off a news outlet or posted about the incident on social media. As the passengers in economy began to deplane, Tony approached Alia. "Senator Johnson," he said, "we have a corporate manager waiting at the jet bridge to speak with you privately." She nodded, gathered her briefcase, and stood up. Shannon and Jacob were nowhere to be seen, likely hiding in the galley or slipping away to avoid further confrontation. Linda gave Alia a small, supportive smile as she stepped off the plane, rolling her carry-on behind her. Waiting at the aircraft, Alia immediately spotted a woman in a crisp navy suit with the American Airlines logo on her lapel. Her name tag read Rachel Smith, and her face carried an expression of concern as she extended her hand. "Senator Johnson, I'm Rachel Smith, and I'm here to address the incident that occurred on your flight." Alia shook her hand, momentarily setting aside her frustration. "I appreciate you meeting me here. We need to discuss what just happened and how American Airlines intends to handle it." With that, they stepped away from the crowd of disembarking passengers and headed for a quieter corner of the terminal. The next phase of accountability was about to unfold. In a small seating area near the gate, Alia sat across from Rachel. The customer relations manager pulled out a tablet, ready to take notes. "Senator Johnson," Rachel began, "first and foremost, on behalf of American Airlines, I offer a sincere apology for any disrespect you encountered. We strive to ensure every passenger feels welcome, and I'm deeply disheartened to learn of your experience." Alia nodded, appreciating the direct acknowledgement. "Thank you, but an apology is just the first step. Shannon and Jacob repeatedly harassed me, questioned my legitimacy, and mocked my presence in first class before and during the flight. They only backed down once I showed my Senate ID." Rachel typed a few notes on her tablet. "I'm already aware of the key points from the flight crew's report. The captain has filed a brief statement as well. May I ask if you want to file a formal complaint, or are you considering legal action?" Alia's jaw tightened. "I want to file a formal complaint. I also want to make sure these employees face disciplinary measures and undergo training to prevent this from happening again. Whether I consider legal action will depend on how the airline responds." Rachel's face remained composed, but Alia could see subtle signs of tension. I understand. We take these matters very seriously. Shannon and Jacob will be placed on immediate suspension while we conduct a thorough investigation. If they're found responsible for violating our code of conduct, especially regarding discrimination, they could be terminated. Alia let that sink in. She wasn't out for blood, but she also believed that real change required real consequences. I hope the investigation is swift and fair. I'm a public figure, yes, but no passenger should have to endure their behavior. I've endured racial bias my entire life, and I'm not about to let it slide without accountability. Rachel nodded firmly. Absolutely. I'll escalate this to our Vice President of Customer Experience as part of our remediation process. We'd also like to offer you a complimentary round-trip ticket on American Airlines or a refund for your current travel costs. Alia waved a dismissive hand. I'm not looking for freebies. I just want the airline's culture to change so that next time someone who doesn't fit the mold of a first-class passenger isn't treated like a criminal. Rachel paused, her gaze solemn. That's our goal too, Senator Johnson. I'll keep you updated on the investigation. In the meantime, please accept our apology and rest assured that we're addressing this matter at the highest levels of management. With that, Alia concluded their meeting. She had a full schedule awaiting her in the Senate, but she knew this issue was far from resolved. The consequences for Shannon and Jacob were already in motion, and the airline's reputation now hinged on how they handled the fallout. For Alia, the day's ordeal had already hit the news cycle, and the real storm was just beginning. By the time she arrived at Capitol Hill, her phone was buzzing nonstop. Vanessa intercepted her outside the Hart Senate office building, her face etched with urgency. Senator, we have media queries from CNN, MSNBC, The Washington Post. Everyone wants a statement about the airline. The incident made Alia suppress a groan. She had hoped to handle this quietly, but in the age of social media, privacy was a luxury. Okay, let's be strategic, she said. Set up a brief press conference after my committee hearing. I need to discuss the policies we're reviewing, but I'll also make a statement about the airline situation. Vanessa nodded. Yes, Senator. The hearing on economic reforms starts in 20 minutes. They'll want your opening remarks. Steeling herself, Alia moved quickly through the corridors, aware of the dual responsibilities she now had: her legislative work and the unexpected role of spotlighting racial discrimination in travel. She delivered her prepared remarks to the Senate committee with poise, strongly advocating for economic measures that would help small businesses, a topic dear to her heart. But as soon as the hearing ended, cameras and reporters swarmed, microphones shoved in her face. Senator Johnson, can you confirm you were harassed by American Airlines staff? Is it true you had to show your Senate ID? Will you be filing a lawsuit against the airline? Alia raised her hand to quiet the barrage and spoke in a calm, measured tone. Yesterday, I experienced an incident of bias from 2 American Airlines employees. Their behavior singled me out and questioned my right to be in first class. While I'm disappointed, I'm not shocked. Racial bias is real and it can appear anywhere. I've filed a formal complaint, and I have faith that American Airlines leadership will investigate and take appropriate action. My main focus is ensuring that all passengers, regardless of status, skin color, or background, can travel without facing discrimination. The reporters pressed further, but Alia kept her responses short and to the point. She refused to let the airline saga overshadow her legislative duties, though she also recognized the power of this moment. By highlighting her experience, she could bring attention to a broader issue affecting countless individuals who lacked the platform she had. As she left the scrum of reporters, her phone buzzed again. A new email from Rachel Smith. It updated her that Shannon and Jacob had been suspended pending investigation. Hard karma, it seemed, was already at play. But Alia knew this was just one step in the ongoing fight for true accountability. 2 days later, Alia woke to headlines splashed across news outlets. American Airlines employees suspended after harassing Black U.S. Senator. Pundits debated whether the staff's actions were purely personal bias or indicative of systemic problems. Alia tried not to let the attention distract her. She stayed focused on her legislative responsibilities while quietly tracking the airline's response. Late that afternoon, she received a call from Rachel Smith. "Senator Johnson, I have important updates," Rachel said. "Our internal investigation found that Shannon and Jacob have a history of unprofessional conduct, including prior complaints about rudeness. Their behavior toward you violated multiple corporate policies, including those related to bias and harassment." Alia's posture stiffened as Rachel continued. "The outcome is that both have been terminated." This wasn't a decision made lightly, but their actions were blatant and confirmed by witness statements from the flight crew. Additionally, we are rolling out a refresher training program on diversity and inclusion for all customer-facing staff starting next week. Alia took a moment to absorb this. While she never took pleasure in someone losing their job, she understood the necessity of consequences. "I appreciate the swift action," she said. "I hope this sends a message that discrimination has no place at American Airlines or anywhere else. I trust the training will address not just this incident but the larger issue of implicit bias." Rachel's voice carried a note of optimism. "That's the plan, Senator. We're committed to creating a respectful environment for all. We also value your input on how best to shape our training going forward." Alia offered a tight smile, even though Rachel couldn't see it over the phone. "I'll consider it. Thank you for the update." Once she hung up, Alia pondered the stark irony. Had Shannon and Jacob treated her with basic respect, none of this would have happened. But their mocking, prejudiced behavior had triggered an explosive fallout, one that forced the airline to confront its internal culture. The final wave of karma hit when a local news outlet interviewed a tearful Shannon, who defended herself by claiming she never intended to be racist, just that she assumed the senator couldn't afford first class. The public backlash was swift and unforgiving. On social media, people pointed out how such assumptions were exactly the problem. Through it all, Alia stayed focused on her legislative path. She had no interest in personal vendettas, only in fairness and justice. Yet, she couldn't deny a small sense of relief that the matter had been settled with firm consequences. Some stories take flight in ways we never expect. For Senator Alia Johnson, a routine trip from Chicago to Washington, D.C., became a stark reminder that prejudice can lurk in the most ordinary places. In the end, her quiet resolve and powerful credentials combined to deliver a swift reckoning for those who mocked her. But this story is bigger than a single confrontation. It's a wake-up call for businesses and individuals alike. We need to check our biases, stand up against discrimination, and ensure that every traveler, whether a high-ranking official or an everyday citizen, receives the respect they deserve. Thank you for watching this story unfold. If Senator Johnson's fight against bias resonates with you, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel. By spreading these stories, we become part of a broader movement toward empathy, justice, and real accountability, values that can help us all soar higher together.